There is a particular kind of silence that only belongs to a house no one has entered in 40 years. Not quiet, not stillness. Something heavier, something that presses against your chest like a damp hand, thick with the smell of wet pine and ozone. Underneath that, the faint, sweet rot of velvet dissolving into dust. When 32-year-old Clara Harrington inherited the sprawling Sterling estate from a great-aunt she could barely recall, the probate lawyer slid a fat manila envelope across the table. Deeds, property maps, stacks of unpaid tax notices, but no keys. She insisted, the attorney said. His voice carried an unease he didn't bother to disguise. Clara made the 6-hour drive deep into the wet, isolating spine of the Oregon mountains. She expected to call a locksmith, maybe shoulder through a window. What she found instead was the massive, hand-carved oak front door, cracked open, waiting. Clara Harrington's life, by every measurable standard, had collapsed. Her architecture firm in Seattle had cratered, leaving behind $80,000 in debt. An eviction notice was taped to her apartment door like a yellow flag of surrender. Her former business partner, Thomas Gable, had slipped off to Europe before the bankruptcy filings hit, clean and convenient. Clara was living from suitcases, surviving on instant ramen and freelance drafting work that barely covered gas money. So when the certified letter arrived from the law offices of Carmichael and Associates, she didn't open it right away. She assumed it was another collection agency hiding behind polished letterhead. It wasn't a demand, it was a summons. Sitting inside David Carmichael's downtown Seattle office, Clara studied the documents fanned across a polished mahogany desk. Carmichael was a man deep into his 60s, weary eyes, a suit pressed within an inch of its life. He folded his hands over a thick file and measured his words before releasing them. Quote 1, he began, slowly, deliberately. Quote 2, quote 3, Clara asked. Her fingers traced the embossed seal on the death certificate. Quote 4, quote 5, Carmichael said. A smile crossed his face, but there was nothing warm in it. Quote 6, quote, he straightened in his chair. Quote 7, quote, he cleared his throat. Carmichael reached into his desk drawer. He withdrew a small box lined in velvet and opened it. Inside, nothing but a single folded piece of parchment. Quote 9, he unfolded the parchment and read aloud. Quote 10, Clara let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. Quote 11, quote 12. Carmichael's tone was flat as stone. Legally, the property belongs to you. Whether you engage a locksmith, take a crowbar to it, or have a conversation with the architecture itself, that is entirely your prerogative. A pause, then quieter. But I will tell you this. Josephine was deeply paranoid. I would advise caution. 2 days later, Clara white-knuckled the steering wheel of a rented Honda through the rain-slicked switchbacks of the Cascade Mountains. Willow Creek was a ghost of a logging town, the kind of place where cell service died miles before the town limits did. She followed Carmichael's hand-drawn map past a crumbling downtown, then up a steep, unpaved logging road that seemed to drink the gray afternoon light right out of the sky. Rain hammered the windshield in a steady, merciless rhythm. The road ended at a pair of towering wrought iron gates. Rust had eaten deep into the metalwork. English ivy choked through every gap, thick, aggressive, possessive. The gates were unchained, pushed slightly inward, as if someone, or something, had forced them open years ago. Clara killed the engine, yanked the zipper of her waterproof jacket to her chin, and grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight. She stepped into freezing drizzle that bit at every exposed inch of skin. Oak Haven rose before her. 3 stories of Victorian Gothic architecture, dark, weathered timber, knife-edged gables, narrow windows that stared back like hollow eyes. The whole structure loomed against the dense evergreen forest behind it, a bruised monument to something forgotten. The wraparound porch listed on one side, sagging under its own rot. What had once been gardens were now feral tangles of briars and dead rhododendrons choking each other for space. Clara's boots crunched up the gravel drive, each step obscenely loud in the silence pressing down around her. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She had a heavy iron crowbar buried in her duffel bag. The plan was simple. Smash a pane on the back door, get inside, photograph everything, and list this place on the market before the week was out. She climbed the rotting porch steps. The wood groaned under her weight like it was warning her. She crossed toward the massive double oak doors and started lowering her bag to dig for the crowbar. Then she saw it. The heavy brass handle on the right door gleamed, perfectly polished. Not a speck of tarnish. Everything surrounding it, the wood, the hinges, the frame, was beaten half to death by weather and time. But that handle shone like someone had buffed it this morning. And the door was open, not wide, just 3 inches. A sliver of pure black gaping from the hallway inside. Clara went rigid. Every hair on the back of her neck lifted. Cold air exhaled through the gap. It carried a layered scent, dried lavender, stale dust, and underneath both, a sharp, metallic bite, faintly copper. If she is meant to claim what is inside, the house will let her in. Someone had been here, or someone was still here. Clara stood frozen on that sagging porch, rain dripping steadily from the rim of her hood. Every rational nerve in her body screamed the same instruction. Turn around, get back in the rented Honda, drive until her phone found a signal, call the sheriff. But there was the debt, the crushing, suffocating mass of it. And behind the debt, the image of returning to Seattle with nothing. Facing the street, she drew one long breath, wrapped her gloved fingers around that polished brass handle, and pushed. The door swung inward. A prolonged, agonizing creak spiraled through the cavernous darkness beyond. Clara thumbed the flashlight on. A blade of stark white light cut into the gloom. The grand foyer opened around her like a mausoleum. High ceilings vanished into thick gray cobwebs that drifted in the draft like something half alive. A sweeping mahogany staircase commanded the center of the room, its steps buried under a moth-eaten runner, once crimson, now the color of old blood. Furniture lined the walls beneath white sheets. In the flashlight's beam, they looked like sleeping ghosts. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 16, underscore. Underscore, Clara's voice disappeared. The house swallowed it whole. Is anyone here? I'm the owner. Nothing answered. She stepped fully inside. Her boots stamped sharp outlines into the thick dust, blanketing the hardwood. She pulled the door shut behind her. Total darkness collapsed around the single beam of her flashlight. She swept the light across the floor to orient herself, then stopped. Her breath caught hard in her chest. Her prints were not the only ones. From the front door, trailing right toward a corridor she couldn't yet see the end of, another set of tracks. Large, heavy-treaded boots. And these were not old. The edges were crisp, undisturbed by any air current, any settling dust, sharp as if cut with a blade. Someone had walked through this foyer hours ago, maybe less. Clara's grip tightened on the metal flashlight until her knuckles ached. She held it like a weapon. Then she followed the tracks. The footprints led down a long, narrow corridor. Portraits of stern-faced figures lined both walls, their painted eyes seeming to pivot with her light. The hallway ended at an archway. Beyond it, an expansive room. Clara stepped through and lowered her flashlight. Her jaw fell open. The library was immaculate. No dust on the polished floor, no cobwebs in the corners. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves stood in perfect order, leather-bound spines gleaming. And the light in this room was not hers. A fire roared in the massive stone hearth, casting warm, flickering shadows across everything. 2 plush leather armchairs faced the flames. Between them, on a small side table, sat a silver tray. A teapot breathed steam into the cold air. 2 porcelain cups waited beside it. I was beginning to wonder if the storm had washed out the lower bridge. The voice came from the shadows. Clara gasped, sharp, involuntary, and swung her flashlight toward the sound. A man sat in the corner of the room. The high back of a reading chair concealed most of him. He raised one hand against the blinding beam. Please, Miss Harrington, lower the light. It's been a long day, and I already have a migraine. She didn't lower it, not an inch. 21, the man replied, calm, almost bored. He rose to his feet and stepped into the reach of the firelight. Late 50s. A surprisingly crisp tweed vest over a white-collared shirt. Dark trousers. A neatly trimmed gray beard framed a face dominated by pale blue eyes. Piercing, exhausted, and dangerously intelligent all at once. He didn't look like a squatter. He looked like someone who lectured on medieval history at a university and quietly despised his colleagues. "My name is Simon Rostova," he said. His hands stayed visible, resting on the chair back. "And I am not trespassing, Clara. I live here. I have lived in the shadows of this house for 22 years. "That's impossible." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "My great-aunt lived here alone. The lawyer said she died a recluse." "Your great-aunt Josephine was many things." Simon's voice dropped low, tender, almost. Quote. He crossed to the tea tray and poured himself a cup with steady hands. Clara stepped back toward the archway, every muscle coiled to run. Simon took a slow sip. His eyes never left hers. Quote 31. He set the teacup down. The clink of porcelain on silver rang through the room like a struck bell. Quote 32. Quote. Silence. Then his voice dropped further. The blood drained from Clara's face. She felt it go, a physical sensation, warmth pulling downward like a tide retreating from shore. "You're insane. I'm leaving." "The front door was open when you arrived, wasn't it?" Simon's voice changed. The polite facade dropped away like a coat hitting the floor. What remained underneath was hard. Military hard. Clara stopped in her tracks. 30's expression was grim. He moved to a heavy oak desk near the window and pulled back a velvet curtain. Behind it, shattered glass. Shards scattered across the polished floor, catching firelight like scattered teeth. A pause. He crossed toward her. Urgency tightened every line of his face. Clara stared at Simon Rostova. Firelight crawled across his weathered features, carving long, jagged shadows into the hollows of his face. The sheer absurdity of what he'd said hung between them. Thick, suffocating, impossible to breathe through. Bloodline? The word left her mouth shaking, half terror, half fury. What is this, a 19th century Gothic novel? I'm a broke architect from Seattle. I came here to sell a house, not play treasure hunter with a madman. She spun on her heel. The flashlight beam cut back down the dark corridor. "If you walk out that front door, Miss Harrington, they will kill you before you reach your Honda." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The certainty in his tone, cold, surgical, absolute, nailed her feet to the floor. "They've been watching the access road for a week. They let you in because they needed you to unlock the lower vault. Now that you're inside, you are nothing but a liability to them." Clara turned back around, slowly. "Who is they?" Simon walked to the mahogany desk. His hand reached beneath the heavy wood. A quiet mechanical click resonated through the room. A full section of that floor-to-ceiling bookshelf swung outward on hidden hinges. Behind it sat a bank of modern, high-definition security monitors. Flat-screen technology concealed behind dusty leather spines. The contradiction nearly broke Clara's brain. Quote, 46, Simon said, fingers moving across a keyboard. Monitors blinked awake one by one. Grayscale feeds filled the screens. Dense forests pressing in from every angle around the estate. Quote, 47, The name hit Clara like a slap. Caldwell Dynamics, a titan in aerospace and defense. The kind of company that landed on the covers of financial magazines quarter after quarter. Quote, 48, Simon went on, pointing toward a monitor displaying the rusted iron gates Clara had driven through earlier. Quote 49. Clara moved closer to the screens, her breath locked in her chest. Monitor 4, a thermal camera. 3 bright white silhouettes cutting through the tree line behind the estate's carriage house. Methodical. Deliberate. They carried long rifles. "Josephine survived," Simon said, his voice barely above a murmur. "She took the primary source evidence with her. Unredacted ledgers, shipping manifests, the physical proof, every piece of it. Then she vanished. Bought this property through a shell corporation. Retrofitted it into a fortress. Hired me to maintain the security infrastructure. Caldwell Dynamics spent 30 years hunting her." He paused. 2 weeks ago, they finally succeeded. "You said she was poisoned," Clara whispered. Her eyes would not leave those thermal signatures, white shapes inching closer to the house. "Thallium," Simon answered. The word came out heavy, odorless, tasteless. Slipped into her weekly grocery delivery by a compromised courier. It broke her down slowly. But before she lost motor function, she initiated a full lockdown on the evidence vault, a lockdown even I cannot bypass. She wrote the new protocol directly into her will. She knew Carmichael would eventually bring you here. Carmichael? Clara's voice cracked. Simon's lip curled. He tipped off Caldwell Dynamics the instant probate paperwork cleared. He sent you straight into a trap, Clara. Simon checked his watch. We have roughly 10 minutes before their retrieval team realizes the western wing is barricaded and decides to breach the foundation with C4. We move, now. Clara did not argue. The crushing weight of her debt shrank to nothing against armed mercenaries closing on the house. She followed Simon out of the library, left her duffel bag where it lay. They moved fast through a narrow, windowless servants' hallway, saturated with the smell of damp earth and rust. Then down, a steep flight of stone stairs dropping into the cavernous cellar beneath the estate. The air turned glacial. Clara's breath curled into white mist with every exhale. Simon led her past rows of empty wine racks, past discarded antique furniture draped in dust, until they reached what appeared to be a dead end. A solid wall of mortared river stone. There's nothing here, Clara panted, sweeping her flashlight across the mossy surface. The architecture of paranoia, Simon muttered. From his pocket he produced a small brass medallion, dense, surprisingly heavy. He pressed it into a specific stone slightly recessed from the others. Pneumatic pressure hissed through the cellar. That wall of river stone was a facade. It split cleanly down its center and retracted outward, exposing a heavy industrial steel blast door. Mounted in its center, a brass plate cast in the shape of a lion's head. No keypad, no keyhole, no handle. __quote_63__, Simon ordered. His eyes darted toward the stairs behind them. Quote 64. Clara stepped backward. Quote 65. Simon's composure fractured for the first time. It reads a specific genetic marker, Josephine's DNA, and by extension, yours. A needle will prick your finger. The system analyzes the sample. Magnetic locks disengage. Do it, Clara. The cellar lights convulsed, then died completely. The estate went black. Every light, every hum of electricity, gone. Only Clara's flashlight remained, its beam thin and jittering against the stone walls. 5 seconds. That was all the silence lasted. Then the backup generator rumbled to life beneath the floorboards. A deep, guttural vibration that climbed through her legs and settled in her teeth. Red emergency light flooded the cellar, harsh, unforgiving, the color of something going wrong. Then the blast hit. A concussive boom tore through the ceiling above them, raining dust and chunks of mortar down like shrapnel. Clara threw her arm over her face. __quote_67__, Simon's voice cut through the ringing that swallowed her hearing. Heavy footsteps, rhythmic, deliberate, trained, hammered across the hardwood directly overhead. Not running, marching. Clara, put your hand in the mechanism. She didn't think. She squeezed her eyes shut, drove her right hand into the cold brass jaws of the lion's mouth, and pressed down. A sharp sting sliced across her index finger, clean, surgical. She gasped. Tried to yank free, but a hidden mechanical clamp snapped around her wrist and held her fast. It's drawing the sample. Hold still, Simon barked. Above them, the cellar door exploded inward. Tactical boots struck the top of the stone stairs. Target is in the basement. Move, move, move. The voice was hard, commanding, echoing down the stairwell like a verdict. Clara's heart slammed against her ribcage in a wild animal rhythm. Click, click, whir. The machine processed the blood, a heavy metallic groan, and the clamp released her wrist. The massive steel blast door cracked open a single inch, breaking its pressurized seal with a hiss of escaping air. Simon seized the edge, hauled it wide with everything he had left. He shoved Clara through the opening and threw his full weight against the door. It slammed shut. He drove the internal deadbolt home just as the first burst of automatic gunfire sparked and screamed against the exterior steel. Clara hit the cold concrete floor hard. She curled around her bleeding finger, chest heaving, dragging in lungfuls of stale, filtered air that tasted like recycled nothing. Beyond the heavy door, muffled shouts. The dull, relentless thud of machinery striking reinforced steel, over and over. She lifted her head, and what she saw made no sense. This was not a dusty cellar room. It was a state-of-the-art bunker, climate-controlled. Racks of encrypted servers lined one wall, their steady blue indicator lights blinking in calm, indifferent rhythm. Filing cabinets covered the opposite side, and in the center of the space sat a massive safe, polished titanium, bolted to the floor. Simon was already moving. He reached the computer terminal in 3 strides, fingers hammering a rapid sequence of commands. Quote 71. Clara's voice came out tight, barely controlled. Simon, they have guns. They're going to cut through that door. He glanced at a security feed on his monitor. The men outside were setting up equipment, sparking, glowing welding gear. Thermal lances. It will take them exactly 14 minutes to burn through 4 inches of reinforced tungsten, he said. We don't have much time. Time for what? To die? To finish what your great-aunt started. His eyes stayed locked on the screen. A progress bar appeared, data copying rapidly to a small, ruggedized external hard drive. Josephine spent 30 years building an airtight case against Caldwell Dynamics. But she didn't just hide the evidence here. She weaponized it. His voice carried a weight that made Clara stop breathing. These servers are wired to a dead man's switch. If Caldwell breaches the system, it automatically corrupts the data. He ripped the hard drive from the console, turned to the titanium safe, spun the dial with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his mind. 34, 12, 88. He pulled the heavy lever. The safe swung open. No money inside, no gold, no jewels. Just a stack of heavily yellowed bound ledgers and a single thick manila folder resting on top. Simon drew the folder out and placed it in Clara's hands. Quote 81, quote. Her fingers trembled against the paper. The tab read, Harrington, primary asset, quote 82, quote. Simon said. His voice dropped. Lower, heavier. A register she hadn't heard from him before. But I wasn't always. He paused. Let the silence do its work. 25 years ago, I was a security contractor for Caldwell Dynamics. I was part of the team tasked with hunting Josephine down. The folder slipped from Clara's grip. It hit the concrete floor with a flat, dead sound. She stumbled backward. Quote 85, quote 86, Simon corrected. Sharp, final. Quote 87, quote, his jaw tightened. Quote 88, quote, he watched Clara's face carefully. But she needed a courier, someone entirely off the grid, someone Caldwell would never think to suspect, someone to move fragments of the evidence to journalists over the years. Clara looked down at the folder on the floor, the label staring up at her. Harrington, primary asset. A sickening understanding began forming in the pit of her stomach. Slow, corrosive, undeniable. She used a family member, Simon said gently. Someone she trusted without reservation. Your father, Arthur Harrington. Clara felt every molecule of oxygen evacuate her chest. My father died in a hit-and-run on Interstate 5 when I was 16. It wasn't a hit-and-run, Clara. Simon stepped closer. Victor Croft, Caldwell's chief fixer, forced Arthur off the road because he was transporting a ledger that documented the bribery of a federal judge. Your father gave his life so that ledger would never reach Caldwell's hands. Josephine was shattered by it. She severed every connection to your mother to keep you safe, but she left you this estate because you are the sole rightful heir to Arthur's legacy. Tears flooded Clara's vision, that crushing absence she'd hauled through every day for more than a decade. The grief she'd built her entire adult identity around, twisted suddenly into something white-hot and blinding. Her father hadn't been taken by some senseless accident. He was killed to protect a corporate balance sheet. A violent spray of orange sparks erupted along the edges of the blast door, thermal lances chewing through steel. The vault's temperature climbed fast. Simon crammed the rugged hard drive in a small, leather-bound book into a waterproof canvas satchel and hurled it to Clara. The drive holds the digitized ledgers, the emails, the offshore account records, Simon rattled off. The book is the physical decryption key. Without it, the drive is worthless. There's a man in Seattle, an investigative reporter named Thomas Vance. Wait, no, Thomas Reed. Find Thomas Reed at the Seattle Chronicle. Hand him the drive. And what about you? Clara demanded, slinging the satchel across her shoulder. I'm activating the Oak Haven protocol, Simon said, turning back to the terminal. He snapped a red plastic cover off a physical switch mounted to the desk. This entire estate is wired with incendiary charges. It was always designed to be a pyre. Simon, you can't stay. I have to hold the override so you get enough time to escape, Simon shouted, seizing her by the shoulders and spinning her toward the rear of the vault. He shoved a rolling filing cabinet aside. Behind it, a dark, impossibly narrow tunnel carved straight into bedrock. Old Bootlegger's Passage. Runs half a mile beneath the mountain and opens near the logging highway. Run, Clara. Run and do not look back. The steel door groaned, a deep, ominous sound. A massive, glowing red circle bloomed at the center of the metal. Less than a minute. Go! Simon roared, pulling a heavy revolver from his waistband and leveling it at that glowing door. Clara froze for one heartbeat. She looked at the man who had guarded her family's most dangerous secret for more than 20 years. Thank you, she whispered. Then she ducked into the black mouth of the tunnel and snapped her flashlight on. The air was dense, damp earth and rot filling her throat. She ran until her lungs screamed and her legs turned to dead weight, the jagged rock walls tearing at her shoulders with every stride. Behind her, muffled through tons of stone and earth, the vault's steel door surrendered with a catastrophic shriek. Through the tunnel came the distant, rapid staccato of gunfire. Then, seconds later, a colossal explosion shook the ground above her. The shockwave slammed her off her feet and sent her sprawling face first into the mud. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. A deep, resonant rumble rolled through the mountain's core. Oak Haven was burning. Simon had honored his word. Clara clawed herself upright, pressing the canvas satchel against her ribs. Her father's killers were turning to ash somewhere above her head, but the war was nowhere close to finished. She tightened her grip on the flashlight and drove herself deeper into the darkness, toward the highway, toward Seattle, and toward the reckoning Caldwell Dynamics had been outrunning for 30 years. The Oregon rain had sharpened into biting sleet by the time Clara hauled herself from the narrow, half-collapsing tunnel. She pitched down a muddy embankment, fingernails raking across exposed tree roots, and crumpled into a shallow ditch that lined the old logging highway. Miles behind her, high up the dense mountain pass, a horrifying column of orange fire punched through the heavy cloud cover. Oak Haven was gone. Simon Rostova and the Caldwell Dynamics retrieval team with it. Clara lay in the freezing mud, dragging air into her lungs, clutching the waterproof canvas satchel to her chest, the way a drowning person grips wreckage. She could not afford the luxury of shock. If Caldwell had operators watching the front gates, odds were strong they had a sweep team patrolling every perimeter road. Clara used the thin tree line as a screen. 3 miles north, she reached a 24-hour truck stop sitting just off Interstate 5. Inside the diner restroom, she scrubbed caked mud and dried blood from her face. When she cracked open the canvas satchel to check the hard drive, something unexpected waited beneath it. Tucked under the heavy leather decryption book, 2 fat stacks of $100 bills cinched in rubber bands, and a burner cell phone. Simon had engineered her escape down to the last variable. She found a long-haul driver willing to take $300 cash for a ride in his sleeper cab. Destination, Seattle. For 5 hours, Clara sat in total darkness, the drone of 18 wheels vibrating through her skeleton. She pulled out the leather-bound book. A cipher. Columns of handwritten alphanumerics filling every page. Then she turned to the final pages. A loose piece of heavy parchment slid free and drifted to the cab floor. Clara switched on the small reading light. Josephine's handwriting. Elegant, archaic, unmistakable. My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, I am dead, and the fortress of Oak Haven has served its final purpose. I am deeply sorry for the burden I have placed upon your shoulders, but you are the only variable Caldwell Dynamics could not predict. You must know the truth about your recent hardships. The bankruptcy of your architecture firm was not a stroke of bad luck. Your partner, Thomas Gable, was quietly bought out by Caldwell's fixers. They engineered your financial destruction, every piece of it calculated. When the moment arrived, you would be desperate enough to claim the inheritance and unseal the vault. But they underestimated the Harrington bloodline. In the lining of this satchel is a routing number to a secure offshore account in Geneva. It contains $12 million, the very funds Caldwell used to finance their illegal chemical weapons testing, which I siphoned from their ledgers over the last 3 decades. It is yours now. Reclaim your life. Avenge your father. Burn them to the ground. Scalding tears hit the parchment. Her whole life, every failure, every debt, her father's death, all of it had been collateral damage in a corporate war she never knew existed. 6:30 a.m. Clara stood beneath the soaring glass facade of the Seattle Chronicle. The city was barely stirring, wrapped in dense marine fog. She slipped past the security desk by falling in behind a cluster of bleary-eyed interns and rode the elevator to the 5th floor. Thomas Reed's desk was a disaster. File folders stacked into small mountains, hollow coffee cups, half-eaten bagels. Reed himself sat behind the wreckage. Late 40s, rumpled corduroy jacket, bruised dark circles permanently carved beneath his eyes. He didn't glance up as she approached. "If you're from legal, I already told you I have 2 sources on the mayor's zoning scandal," Reed muttered, fingers hammering the keyboard. "I'm not from legal," Clara said. She dropped the heavy canvas satchel square onto his keys. "I'm Arthur Harrington's daughter." Reed went still. The clatter of typing died mid-stroke. His gaze lifted, swept across her battered face, her torn jacket streaked with dried mud, the bandaged index finger on her right hand. 25 years earlier, Reed had been a junior reporter. He had tried to crack the story behind Arthur Harrington's suspicious fatal car crash. He failed. "You have 5 minutes," Reed said. His voice fell to a rough whisper as he rose and guided her into a soundproof glass conference room. Clara skipped the backstory. No mention of the biometric lock, nothing about the firefight. She unzipped the satchel, pulled out the ruggedized hard drive, and set it beside Josephine's decryption book. "This is the unredacted financial history of Caldwell Dynamics from 1987 to present day," Clara said, her voice flat, controlled, cold. "It contains proof of illegal chemical testing, systemic embezzlement from the Department of Defense, the assassination of a federal judge, and the murder of my father. I have the decryption key." Reed stared at the drive the way a man stares at a live grenade. "If this is what you say it is, they will kill us both before the noon edition goes to print." "Then we don't run it at noon," Clara fired back. "We upload the decrypted files to a secure cloud server. You blast the raw data to the Department of Justice, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and every major news syndicate on Earth, all at once.